In this video, you're going to learn how to import the Excel file into Alteryx, and then we will begin the data cleansing and transformation process using the data cleanse tools and also limiting the data to just the rows that we want. Before we import the data into Alteryx, you cannot have your Excel file open. So if you still have it open, go ahead and close your Excel file now. And then to deal with Alteryx, if you're new to this program, there are 3 workspaces that you'll see. The first space that you see is right here, and it is called your canvas. This is where you're going to put all of the tools that you want to use for your task. The second window that you see is called the configuration window. This is the space where we're going to tell the tools what it is that we would like them to do. The final space is the results window. This is where we see what the tool has done, and also we get any errors, conversion errors, or warnings so that it's easy for us to troubleshoot and try to figure out if we have a problem with that. Speaking of troubleshooting, it's important to note that Alteryx will not alter your underlying file. It will load the data into Alteryx, it will manipulate the data within Alteryx, and then you can export the transformed file. At no point during this process will it mess up your underlying file. So if you run into a problem where you haven't configured a tool appropriately, or the tool just isn't working the way that you wanted to, you can go ahead and reconfigure the tool, or you can delete the tool and start over again without having any fear that you've messed up your underlying data. Every task that we want to execute in Alteryx requires us to do 3 things. The first is to identify the tool that we want to use and drag it onto our canvas. The second is to configure the tool. Again, tell the tool what it is that we would like it to do. And then finally, to execute the task, we need to hit the Run button, which in my version of Alteryx is this blue button on the upper right-hand corner. We're going to begin by importing the data from Excel. To do so, I'm under the In-Out menu. It's the first menu. You may also find this tool under your Favorites menu. And I'm going to identify the Input Data tool. To select a tool, you will click on it once, and then you will drag it down onto your canvas. Now that we have the tool that we want to use, we have to configure the tool. Again, tell it what it is that we would like it to do. Since we are loading the data into Alteryx, this configuration just requires us to identify where the tool is located and how we want to import it. To configure the tool, we will use the down arrow at the upper right-hand corner of the configuration window. We'll click on that once to reveal the menu. We can go ahead and find the files by clicking on Files, Select File, and then selecting the file that we want. For this video, I'm going to use the 1516 gross migration file. This particular file only has 1 sheet. If we had multiple sheets, we would see those when we click on the drop-down menu, but since there's only 1 sheet, we can leave it as Sheet 1 and click OK. Once we've done so, we get a preview of the data that we will be importing into Alteryx. And so now that we have put our tool on our canvas and we have configured our tool, our next step is to run our Alteryx to execute that task. Once we have done so, we have now brought the data into Alteryx. We can see that some of the issues that we talked about when we were reviewing the Excel files are coming through in Alteryx. Those rows where headers could not be identified are replaced with null values. We have the data coming in, and we can scroll over and see that we have quite a bit of data that has come in. And then we also have a bunch of columns that have nulls on the right-hand side of this data set. So we have a lot of cleaning to do before this data will be ready for use. The first cleaning step that we're going to do is we're going to limit the data to just the rows of data that we want. To do this, we're going to go under the Preparation menu. It's the menu right next to the In-Out, represented by a blue dot. Before we can limit the data, first we should always practice data cleansing. In this case, we're going to bring down the data cleansing tool. And we can see that this particular tool has a number of default configurations. Here, it asks us which fields we would like to cleanse. And the default is to check every single field. So go ahead and leave that checked. The next default configuration is to replace nulls with blanks or zeros. This is a default configuration that you want to consider carefully because it is not always appropriate to replace nulls or missing values with zeros, particularly if they're numeric, or blanks. For this data set, it's perfectly fine, so we will go ahead and leave those default configurations checked. Finally, removing unwanted characters, specifically leading and trailing white spaces, is usually a good idea, so we can go ahead and leave that default configuration. Because we've brought the tool onto our canvas and we've configured our tool, we can go ahead and run that step. And we can see that our data in our results window looks a little bit different. A lot of those nulls have now gone away, and we have gone ahead and gotten rid of white space that we may not be able to see. Sometimes it's better to use tools sequentially so that you can execute tasks in sequence instead of trying to do them all at once. This is a good idea for the second data cleansing step that we're going to do. Specifically, we have a problem within the data set where numbers, specifically these that have commas within them, are going to be read in as characters. And so the challenge here is that when we want to convert these numbers to be read in as numbers, Alteryx has a default that it is only going to keep the numbers that precede the first character. In this case, in column F4, we see that we have 120,784,777. If we do not remove these commas prior to changing the data type from character over to number, Alteryx will only retain 120. And there is a slight difference between the number 120 and 120,784,777. To remove this character, we are going to use a second data cleansing tool in sequential order. Don't try to run these two at the same time. It works a little bit better just to run these sequentially. We're going to leave all the fields selected, but we're going to remove all of the default configurations by unchecking the boxes. What it is that we would like this data cleansing tool to do is to remove the punctuation. So we will go ahead and select punctuation and click Run. And what we'll see is as we scroll down that now that number 120,784,777 has no punctuations in the middle of it. Now that we've cleaned our data, the next step is to limit the data to just the observations that we would like to see, just the number of rows. We're going to use the filter tool to accomplish this. We've stayed on the preparation menu. We just moved one tool to the right of the data cleansing tool. And the filter tool has one input anchor, but it has two output anchors. The two output anchors denote true. So once you select the condition that you'd like to filter on, if it is true, it will go into this T output anchor. And then all of the observations that deal with the case where it is not true will go into the F or false output anchor. In this case, I'm demonstrating using the state of Hawaii, and I happen to know that Hawaii's FIPS code, or state code issued by the federal government, is 15. So I will be able to filter on that FIPS code to get to just the observations that deal with Hawaii. To do so, I'm going to keep the basic filter, and I'm going to use the drop-down menu next to the select column, and I'm going to keep the United States. These header rows are not named appropriately yet, but that first column is the FIPS column. So we'll just select the first column, which happens to be the United States, and we say if the first column equals, and I'm going to put in the number 15 since that's Hawaii's FIPS number. Your state will have a different number. Then keep that observation. If not, get rid of it. So now that we have our tool on our canvas and we have configured our tool, we can go ahead and click Run. And what we'll see is under the true condition, where we said if the United States is equal to 15, which designates Hawaii, then keep those observations. We have now limited our data set to 8 rows of data. And that is just the rows that contain the information for Hawaii in total and Hawaii for each of its AGI categories. If we were to click on the false condition, then we would see all of the other observations that we have eliminated. This is very nice because anybody that wants to review what it is that you have done or replicate it, or when you go back to look at it, will be able to see both what you kept as well as what it is that you have eliminated. So it makes it very easy to reevaluate what it is that you have done and see if you've done it correctly.